My name is Natalie Mercer. I'm 32 years old, and the night my engagement ended, my apartment was full of warm, light, half-melted ice in plastic drink tubs, and people who seemed to know more about my relationship than I did. Or maybe not more. Maybe they just recognized the truth before I was ready to. Mason and I had been together for 4 years. He was 29, funny when he wanted to be, affectionate when it cost him nothing, and for a long time I mistook that for steadiness. He had been living in my apartment for almost 2 years, though the lease had only ever been in my name. 6 months earlier, we got engaged. Looking back, the ring should have warned me. We found it at a little artisan fair upstate, simple hammered sterling silver, one clear cubic zirconia, set low in the center, nothing flashy, nothing traditional, exactly $100. I remember holding it while Mason smiled and said, "This one feels like us. No performance, no blood diamond, no debt, just something real." At the time, I thought that meant he was grounded. I thought it meant we were building something honest. He even joked that we'd upgrade on our 5th anniversary, get something more adult later, once life settled down. I loved that idea. I loved how easily he made something modest feel intimate. I loved that I thought he meant it. The engagement party was supposed to be small, just close friends, 15 people maybe, but my apartment still felt crowded. Music too loud, perfume mixing with food, gift bags piling near the kitchen island, laughter starting too quickly and dying too suddenly whenever I came close. The whole night carried a strange current under it. Mason looked beautiful. That was the first terrible thing. He was glowing in that careless way some people do when they already know they're being watched. Soft gray shirt, sleeves rolled. That half smile I used to think belonged to me. But every time I moved toward him, he found a reason to drift away. He needed more ice. He had to check on drinks. Someone wanted to show him something. Each excuse was small enough to dismiss. That was what made it effective. One little evasion after another, until avoidance became the atmosphere in the room. And then there was Ava, 30 years old, the ex-girlfriend who never seemed entirely past tense. Lately, Mason had been seeing more of her again, always with a harmless explanation already waiting before I even asked. "She's going through a rough patch. She knows me better than most people." "You're reading into it, Nat. She's history." After a while, the word history stopped sounding comforting. That night, she was everywhere, leaning too close when he spoke, laughing first at things that weren't funny, standing near his shoulder as if her body still remembered where it used to belong. I'd brought it up before, and Mason always gave me the same tired look, the same disappointed exhale. "You're being paranoid," he would say. "Ava is like family." No, that wasn't true. No one looks at family like that. We started opening gifts a little after 9, towels tied with ribbon, a blender still in its box, candles, wine glasses, a cookbook Mason would never open, a framed print I instantly hated, but thanked them for anyway. People stood around the coffee table with drinks in hand and phones half out, all of it bright and cheerful on the surface. Then Chloe, one of Mason's closest friends, stood up with a glass of Prosecco and decided she wanted to make a toast. She was drunk enough to be reckless and sober enough to think she was funny. "To Mason and Natalie," she said, lifting her glass. Everyone cheered. "To Mason," she added, grinning as if she were about to say something charming. "Honestly, one of the smartest men I know." A few people laughed. I smiled, because smiling is what you do in public before you understand you're about to be humiliated. "He's got a great job, a beautiful apartment." That earned a bigger laugh because, yes, it was my apartment. "And," she said, turning slowly, "he's so smart he's even got a backup plan. Right, Ava?" Everything inside me went still. Not quiet. Still. There's a difference. Quiet can be peace. Stillness is when your body understands something terrible before your mind catches up. The room made that awful collective sound people make when someone crosses a line and everyone realizes it at once, a sharp inhale shared by too many people. I looked at Mason. He was flushed, but not horrified. That was the part I never forgot. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't angry. He wasn't confused. He looked embarrassed only because Chloe had said it out loud. Then he looked at Ava. Ava, standing there in black silk, lifted her glass with the faintest smirk, like this was an inside joke that had simply reached the wrong audience. And Chloe kept going, because of course she did. "I always tell him," she said, laughing now, "if Natalie ever messes up, Ava's right there on the bench, ready to sub in." My stomach dropped so hard it felt physical, like missing a step in the dark. Suddenly, every odd moment from the last 6 months lined itself up in a neat, sickening row. The nights Mason said he was out with friends, but his location showed him near Ava's building. The way he'd started turning his phone face down. The lunches that somehow lasted 3 hours. The way he'd started talking about the wedding as if it were an idea instead of a plan. The fact that lately, every time I asked a direct question, he answered my tone instead of my words. They were all watching me, waiting, not to see whether I was hurt, to see what I would do with it. So I laughed. A real laugh, too. Open, bright, almost impressed. It startled them. I saw it. "Chloe," I said, standing slowly, "that is actually brilliant." Mason's expression tightened. "Natalie," he said quietly, warning already creeping into his voice. "No, seriously." I lifted a hand, still smiling. "It's smart. Contingency planning. Diversification. You never want all your emotional investments in one place." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone looked down into their drink. Someone else pretended to study the tissue paper on the gift table. Mason took a step toward me. "Babe, stop." "Babe." He only used that voice when he wanted to make me sound unreasonable before I'd even done anything. I didn't look at him. Earlier that evening, before guests arrived, I had slipped the ring into its velvet box and tucked it into my jacket pocket so it wouldn't get smudged before the cake-cutting photos. It was still there by the door. I walked to the coat rack so calmly that people moved aside without realizing they were doing it. The room had gone so silent I could hear hangers brushing together. When I turned back around, the box was in my hand. Mason saw it and went pale. "Natalie," he said again, sharper now. I walked straight past him. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. Ava's expression changed the second she realized I was heading toward her. The smirk disappeared. Her shoulders tightened. But she didn't move. Maybe she still thought I was bluffing. Maybe she thought I would protect the scene even if no one else had protected me. I stopped in front of her and held out the little velvet box. She stared at it, then at me, then at Mason. "Nat," Mason said, and this time there was panic in it. I took Ava's hand before she could pull away, opened her fingers, and placed the box into her palm. "Tag in," I said evenly. "He's all yours." No one moved. No one breathed. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt stunned. Chloe's mouth dropped open. Ava stared at the box as if it had burned her. Mason took one step toward me. "What the hell are you doing?" I turned and looked him dead in the face, ending the part where you get to keep me while auditioning my replacement. He blinked like I'd spoken another language. "It was a joke," he said. I tilted my head. "Was it a joke when you were at her apartment last Tuesday? Was it a joke the weekend I visited my mother and you told me you spent Saturday alone?" That hit. His mouth opened, then closed. And for one brief, vicious second, I saw something flicker across Ava's face. Not guilt, not shame. Alarm. Because whatever version of the story Mason had been feeding both of us, he hadn't expected those versions to collide. I turned toward the rest of the room. "Party's over," I said. "Thanks for coming. Please leave." Nobody argued at first. They just started grabbing coats and purses with that frantic politeness people use when they know they're escaping a scene they helped create. Chloe mumbled, "I didn't mean." But I looked at her once, and she stopped talking. One couple slipped out without saying goodbye. Someone left a barely touched drink on my bookshelf without a coaster, and I noticed that absurdly, as if my brain needed one small, normal irritation to keep from breaking open. Mason didn't leave. Of course he didn't. He waited until the last few guests were fumbling into the hallway, then lowered his voice and hissed, "You are making me look insane." I laughed again, but there was no warmth in it now. "I'm making you look exactly as prepared as your friends think you are." Ava was still near the kitchen, clutching the velvet box like evidence she didn't want. She looked less smug now, more trapped. "Mason," I said, "take your guests and go. This is my home too." That sentence landed hard because it was the sentence he always used when he wanted comfort without responsibility. My home when he wanted a place to sleep. My home when he wanted to play host. My home when he wanted sympathy. Never my name on the lease. Never his money on the deposit. Never his signature on anything that mattered. "No," I said quietly. "It's where you've been staying." He stared at me, like maybe this was the moment I was supposed to cry. Bargain. Ask who she really was. Ask whether he loved me. Ask whether we could fix it. But all of that had died the second he didn't look surprised. Ava finally stepped forward and placed the ring box on the edge of the kitchen counter. She didn't meet my eyes. "I should go," she said. "Yes," I replied, "you should." Mason rounded on her so fast it told me more than any confession could have. "Ava, don't!" She cut him off with a look, not tender, not loyal, just irritated. Then she grabbed her coat and left without another word. And there it was. Not romance, not destiny, not some great love story waiting in the wings. Just two selfish people who had been standing too close to a boundary until someone finally named what they were doing. When the door shut behind her, Mason turned back to me with his hands spread, angry and pleading at once. You blew this up over nothing. Over nothing. The room still smelled like roast chicken, birthday cake frosting, and cheap sparkling wine. Half-opened gifts sat under the lamp like props from a life that had ended mid-scene. On the coffee table, two champagne flutes leaned toward each other, one with my lipstick still drying on the rim. I looked around at the wreckage of my own engagement party and felt something inside me settle into a shape I didn't recognize yet. Not heartbreak. Not exactly. Clarity. Get out, Mason. He swore under his breath. He called me dramatic. He called me paranoid. He said I was humiliating him over a joke, over one stupid comment, over my own insecurity. He reached once for my wrist, lightly, as if touch could rewind the last 10 minutes. I stepped back before he made contact. That was when he knew. Not that I was angry. That I was done. He grabbed his jacket from the chair by the door so hard it knocked one of the gift bags over. Tissue paper spilled across the floor. He yanked the door open, turned as if he wanted one last line, one final sentence that would make this my fault. But he had already used all his lines. So he left. The lock clicked behind him, and suddenly the apartment was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint, muffled sound of people still arguing in the hallway outside. I stood there for a long moment without moving. Then I walked to the counter and picked up the velvet box. It looked small in my palm. Cheap. Exact. $100. That was the price of the ring. Not the price of the relationship, not the price of the embarrassment, not the price of all those months I spent doubting my instincts because a man preferred calling me insecure to telling me the truth. But maybe it was the price of the lesson. And compared to what marrying him would have cost me, it suddenly felt almost merciful. I locked the door, turned off the music, and looked around my apartment. The glasses, the wrapping paper, the stains, the proof that something had ended here whether I was ready or not. Then I took a slow breath, pulled out my phone, and opened the note I would need by morning. Change locks. Boxes things. Cancel everything I can. Only then did I finally let myself cry. The next morning didn't feel like a breakup. It felt like the aftermath of something public and ugly. Too quiet, too still, evidence everywhere. I woke up on the couch with my neck stiff, mascara dried into a faint shadow under my eyes, and sunlight cutting across the living room like nothing had happened. The empty glasses were still there, the half-eaten cake, the torn wrapping paper. Hours earlier, people had been laughing in this exact room. Now it felt strange. Not his. Not fully mine either. Just recently reclaimed. I sat up slowly and read the note on my phone again. Change locks, boxes things, cancel everything I can. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Just steps. That was the only way through it. My phone buzzed before my feet even hit the floor. Mason. 7 missed calls. Then messages. Mason, you overreacted. Mason. Can we talk like adults? Mason. Ava already left. It's not what you think. Mason. Open the door. I didn't reply. Another message came in immediately. Mason. I'm outside. My chest tightened for half a second, then flattened. I walked quietly to the door and looked through the peephole. He was there. Same clothes as the night before. Hair messy, face tight with anger he was trying to disguise as control. He knocked once, then harder. Natalie, come on, this is stupid. I stayed still. I know you're in there. Another knock, louder. This is my place too. No, that sentence again. Always that sentence. I turned away from the door and walked straight into the bedroom instead. If I opened it, I would get dragged into another conversation where he explained my feelings back to me until I doubted them. If I stayed silent, I kept control. So I chose silence. The knocking continued for another minute. Then 2. Then stopped. A pause. A final sharp hit against the door. And then his footsteps fading down the hallway. I didn't move until I heard the building's front door close. Only then did I exhale. Not from relief. From confirmation. It was real. I wasn't taking him back. The locksmith arrived at 11. I didn't even feel strange saying the words out loud. I need the locks changed. The man nodded like he'd heard it 100 times before. Maybe he had. Maybe I wasn't special. Maybe this was just another Tuesday for him. Another woman standing in a doorway, pretending her voice wasn't shaking while she rewrote her life through practical decisions. Boyfriend? He asked casually. Ex, I said. He gave a short nod. Got it. That was all. No pity, no curiosity. Just the sound of metal tools and the sharp click of something final being put into place. When he handed me the new keys, they felt heavier than they should have. as if they actually belonged to me now. I started packing Mason's things as soon as the locksmith left. Not slowly, not carelessly, efficiently. That was the only way to do it. His clothes first. Drawers emptied into boxes, shirts folded without thought, shoes lined up and stacked like inventory instead of memory. But memory doesn't care about order. It hits anyway. The gray hoodie I used to steal because it smelled like his cologne. The watch I bought him for his birthday, still sitting on the dresser like time had stopped for him, but not for me. A receipt tucked into his jeans pocket from a cafe across town. Not our usual place. Not anywhere I recognized. I held it a second too long, then dropped it into the box. No investigation. No digging. I already knew enough. By early afternoon, the apartment looked different. Not empty. Separated. His life reduced to 3 taped boxes by the door, as if he had never fully lived there at all. As if he had only been passing through. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered before thinking. Hello? Silence for half a second. Then Ava. I think this got out of hand, she said carefully. Her voice was softer than the night before, measured, controlled, like she was choosing each word. I leaned against the counter and stared at the boxes. No, I said. It finally got honest. She exhaled. That wasn't supposed to happen like that. I almost laughed. What part? I asked. The joke or the truth behind it? Silence again. Then quieter. He told me you two were complicated. Of course he did. He said you were distant, she added, that things weren't stable. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. The script he had been handing out to make himself look justified. I wasn't distant, I said calmly. I was asking questions he didn't want to answer. Ava didn't respond immediately. And in that silence, I could feel something shifting. Not toward me. Away from him. I don't want to be in the middle of this, she said finally. You're not, I replied. You're at the end of it. That landed. I could hear it. I'm stepping back, she said. Whatever this is, it's not my situation. Of course she was. Because it stopped being fun the second it became real. Good, I said, and I hung up. Mason came back that evening. Of course he did. This time he didn't knock politely. He pounded. Hard. Open the door. I stood on the other side, arms crossed, and didn't move. You changed the locks, he shouted. Yes, I said through the door. A beat, then disbelief. You're serious right now? I've never been more serious. This is illegal, Natalie. No, I said calmly. What's illegal or not depends on the lease, and you're not on it. Silence, then anger, sharper now. You can't just lock me out of my own home. It's not your home. That was the line. The real one. The one everything had been circling around. I opened the door just enough to face him. Not enough to let him in. Just enough for him to see me clearly. His eyes dropped immediately to the boxes by the entryway. What is this? He asked. Your things. You packed my stuff? Yes. Without me here? You weren't here last night either? That hit. I saw it cross his face. Quick. Ugly. Then gone. You don't get to decide this by yourself, he snapped. I already did. He stepped forward instinctively. The door didn't move. Neither did I. For a second, it looked like he might try to force his way in. But something in my face must have stopped him. Because he didn't. Instead, his voice dropped lower. More dangerous. That chair, he said. You didn't pack that. Of course. The expensive ergonomic chair I bought him. $600. My card. His promise to pay me back later. Later never came. It's not in the boxes, I said. Because it's mine. No, I said evenly. It isn't. I use it for work. And I paid for it. That doesn't mean you get to keep it. It does when you never reimburse me. His jaw tightened. You're being petty. I almost smiled. No, I said quietly. I'm being accurate. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. Because the version of me he knew would have backed down by now. Would have explained. Would have softened. This version didn't. You have 10 minutes, I said, stepping back slightly. Take the boxes. Leave everything else. You can't just... 10 minutes. He hesitated. Calculating. Looking for leverage. Finding none. Then he grabbed the first box too hard, like he wanted to break something. But there was nothing left to break. Because I had already started taking my life back, one piece at a time, before he even realized the game was over. The knock came 2 days later. Not loud. Not angry. Measured. Official. I knew before I even reached the door that it wasn't Mason. Mason didn't knock like that. He pounded. He demanded. He performed. This was different. I looked through the peephole. 2 officers. Uniforms crisp. Faces neutral. The kind of calm that doesn't mean safe so much as practiced. And behind them, down the hallway, Mason and Ava. Of course she came. Not close enough to be involved. Not far enough to be uninvolved. Just present, like a witness who wanted to look innocent. I opened the door. Yes? "Ma'am," one of the officers said, polite but firm, "we received a call regarding a domestic dispute and a possible lockout." Of course he said it like that. Clean, neutral, as if what had happened could be folded neatly into a phrase that small. I kept one hand on the door. "There's no dispute," I said, and I didn't deny him his belongings. Behind them, Mason let out a short, bitter laugh. "She changed the locks," he said loudly, making sure the hallway heard him. "Won't let me in. Won't give me my property." There it was. The version of the story he wanted strangers to hear. Simple, convenient, victim-shaped. The second officer glanced at me. "Do you mind if we ask a few questions?" Not at all. Because this wasn't really a fight anymore. This was record building. "Is he on the lease?" the first officer asked. "No." "Does he officially reside here?" "No." "Does he receive mail here?" "Sometimes, but not as his legal address." The officer gave a small nod. Behind him, Mason shifted, frustration pulling tighter across his face. "He lives here," Ava said suddenly, stepping half a pace forward. "All his stuff is here." I looked at her, not as competition, not even as a threat, just as someone who had chosen the wrong side of a situation she didn't fully understand. "Most of his things are packed already," I said. That made the officers look past me. 3 boxes stood by the entryway, taped shut and labeled. Mason's expression flickered. He hadn't expected organization. He'd expected emotion. One of the officers asked, "And the rest of the dispute?" I stepped back, reached for the folder on the entry table, and handed it over. "My lease," I said, "and the receipt for the office chair he's claiming." The officer opened it. His partner leaned in. Mason's voice sharpened. "What is that supposed to prove?" "That the chair isn't yours just because you were sitting in it," I said. The officer looked up. "So that's the item being disputed?" "Yes, I bought it on my card. He never paid me back." Mason scoffed. "I used it for work. That makes it mine." "No," I said, "it makes it useful." The first officer closed the folder. "This appears to be a civil matter," he said. "We're not here to decide ownership of the chair. We're here to make sure he can collect his personal property peacefully." Translation: "We're not doing your work for you." Mason didn't like that. I could see it in the way his shoulders tightened. He wanted authority on his side. He wanted someone else to pressure me into giving him what he wanted. He wasn't getting it. "So what?" he snapped. "She just gets to keep my stuff?" The officer's tone stayed flat. "She keeps what she owns. You take what's yours." That landed harder than anything I'd said. For a second, Mason went quiet. Then, louder. "This is ridiculous." "It's reality," I said. Ava crossed her arms. Less smug now, less certain. The officer gestured toward the boxes. "You can take those now. We'll stay while you do." Mason didn't move immediately. He was still looking at me, searching for hesitation, for softness, for the version of me he knew how to manipulate. He didn't find her. So he grabbed the first box. Rough, needlessly rough. The cardboard bent under his grip. Then the second. Then the third. Each one felt like a quiet undoing of the life he thought he had inside my apartment. Ava stepped back to make room, but she didn't help him. She didn't touch the boxes. She only watched, and that told me more than anything she could have said. When Mason came back for the last time, he stopped just inside the doorway, close enough for me to see the anger in his eyes. "You're really doing this," he said. Not a question. A realization. "Yes," I said. He shook his head slowly. "You're going to regret this." There it was. Not a shout. A threat wrapped in calm. I held his gaze. "No, I would have regretted staying." That hit him harder than the officer's presence did. Because it wasn't dramatic. It was true. And truth doesn't leave much room to argue. He opened his mouth as if he wanted one last twist, one last correction, one last chance to put me back into the role he understood. Nothing came out. The officer stepped forward slightly. "Sir, let's go." Mason lingered one beat longer, then turned and walked out. Ava followed. Not beside him, not behind him. Separate. That was new. The officers gave me one last look. Not pity, not judgment, just recognition. Then left too. The door closed. And just like that, that part was over. Not the story. Not the fallout. But the part where he still believed he could force his way back in. I stood there for a long moment. Then I turned the lock. Slowly, deliberately, once. No one knocked again that night. For 2 days, everything held. No calls. No messages. No footsteps outside my door. I cleaned the apartment until it stopped smelling like a party that had gone bad. I threw out leftover food, washed every glass, folded every blanket people had tossed over chairs. I cleared away the evidence of celebration until the place looked like mine again. I almost believed that was the end of it. That when people lost, they left. I should have known better. The call came late in the afternoon. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Hi, this is Natalie." "Hi, Natalie, this is building management." My stomach tightened instantly. Not fear. Instinct. Yes? There was a pause on the other end. Not long, just long enough to make whatever came next feel heavier. We've received several complaints regarding your unit. Complaints. Plural. What kind of complaints? Noise disturbances, frequent arguments, reports of unusual activity. Unusual. That word people use when they want suspicion without details. I leaned against the counter. I haven't had anyone over since the weekend. Another pause. We've also received reports of strong chemical odors and unfamiliar individuals coming and going late at night. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was obvious. So clumsy it almost insulted me. That isn't true, I said. I understand, the voice replied, still careful, still neutral. But when multiple complaints come in, we have to follow up. If it continues, it could lead to a formal lease review. There it was. Not a threat, a process, which was worse. Processes don't care about truth. They care about volume, consistency, paper trails. Who filed them? I asked. I'm not authorized to disclose that. Of course not. Anonymous, keen, cowardly. I closed my eyes for a second and pictured Mason in the hallway again. Not pounding this time, just talking, planting, spreading. The same way he always had. Not direct conflict. Narrative control. I understand, I said. Thank you for letting me know. When the call ended, the apartment felt different again. Not invaded. Watched. Like a version of me I hadn't written was already circulating through the building. And for the first time since the party, I felt something close to fear. Not of Mason himself. Of what people might believe if he got there first. I didn't wait. I opened my laptop immediately. Not to scroll, not to distract myself, to answer. I drafted an email to management. Clear, direct, documented. No emotion, no over-explaining. Just facts. Subject. Response to complaint. Notice. Unit 4B. I stated that I lived alone. That there had been no gatherings since the weekend. That there were no illegal substances in the unit. That I had recently ended a personal relationship and believed false complaints might be connected to that conflict. That I was willing to cooperate fully with any inspection or formal review. I read it twice, then sent it. Time-stamped, recorded. Impossible to deny later. Then I opened a second document and started writing everything down. Dates, times, messages, the party, the lock change, the police visit. Every detail I could remember, because stories can be bent. Records hold shape. The second call came the next morning. Same number, different tone. Hi, Natalie, this is management again. Yes, we received your email. A pause. Then, thank you for the clarification. Not warmth, not apology, but something had shifted. We're noting your response in the file. For now, there's no further action. For now, temporary. But enough. Understood, I said. And Natalie? Yes? If anything else happens, any contact, any further issues, please let us know. There it was. The first crack. Not in my story. In his. Because now it wasn't just accusation. Now it was documented conflict. And once both sides are on record, control gets harder to fake. Thank you, I said and hung up. I didn't feel relieved. Not exactly. Because this wasn't over. It was escalation. Quiet escalation. The kind that doesn't announce itself all at once. It builds in layers until something gives way. I stood in the middle of my apartment and looked around. Everything was in place. Clean. Controlled. Mine. And yet something had changed again. The rules. This wasn't about the chair anymore. Or the breakup. Or even Ava. This was about control, narrative, reputation. And Mason had made one thing very clear. If he couldn't take something from me directly, he would try to take it indirectly. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. People moving normally. Cars passing. Life continuing as if nothing had happened. But up here, something had started. Something quieter. More dangerous. And this time I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. The lawyer's office smelled like coffee and recycled air. Neutral. Professional. Safe. I sat across from a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice. The kind of person who didn't waste words because she didn't need to. She listened without interrupting while I laid everything out from start to finish. The party. The toast. The ring. The lock change. The police visit. The building complaints. When I finished, she looked over her notes and said, "Good." I blinked. "Good? You documented quickly. You responded in writing. You didn't keep arguing with him. That helps." Helps. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like survival with paperwork. What now? I asked. She tapped her pen once on the folder. Now we make it expensive for him to keep trying. The letters went out that afternoon. 3 of them. 1 to Mason, 1 to Ava, 1 to Chloe. Formal, cold, precise. Cease and desist. Stop all false reports. Stop defamatory communication. Stop any further attempts to interfere with my tenancy or reputation, or legal action would follow. No shouting, no drama. Just consequence and clean language. And once the letters were sent, they existed. On record. Permanent. The silence after that felt different. Not empty. Interrupted. Like something had been moving toward me and suddenly hit glass. No more complaints came in. No more management calls. No more footsteps slowing outside my door. Even my phone stayed quiet. For 2 days. Then 3. And on the 4th, it rang. Unknown number again. I stared at it longer this time before answering. Hello? A breath. Then Ava. I got the letter, she said. Her voice wasn't careful anymore. It was tired. I figured. A pause. Then, I'm not part of this. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. You were, I said. I didn't file anything, she said quickly. I didn't call your building. I didn't do any of that. I believed her. Not because she deserved trust. Because the tone had changed. Less curated. More self-protective. I know, I said. That surprised her. You do? Yes. Silence. Then quieter. He's spiraling. There it was. The first crack said out loud. I didn't answer right away. I let her keep going. He thought this would pressure you, she said. Make you back off. Give him leverage. Leverage. Over a chair. Over a breakup. No. Over control. He wanted me to back him up if this escalated, she added. I leaned against the counter. Escalated how? She hesitated. Then said, legal claims, statements, whatever he needed. There it was. Bigger than complaints. He wasn't just trying to irritate me. He was trying to build a version of events. A case. And Ava had been willing to stand near it, right up until it became real enough to stain her too. I said no, she added quickly. I'm not getting dragged into something like that. Of course not. The backup plan only worked when it was flirtation and ego. Once it carried consequences, she wanted distance. I'm stepping away, she said, completely. I traced a small scratch in the countertop with my thumb. Good, I said. Another silence. Then she said, softer now, I didn't realize he was still with you like that. Not fully. There was her version. The story she told herself so she could stand where she had stood. He was, I said. Simple, flat, true. I see that now, she murmured. But it didn't matter. Understanding after the damage is just late information. I won't contact you again, she said. That would be best. And then she hung up. I stood there for a long moment after the call ended, not thinking, just standing, because something had shifted again. Not on my side, on his. The structure he had been trying to build was cracking, and he was losing pieces. Ava stepping away wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Without her, his story weakened. Without her, his backup plan vanished. And that meant he was standing in it alone now. That night my phone lit up again. Different number. But I already knew. I didn't answer. The message came through anyway. Mason. So this is what you're doing now? Lawyers? Really? Mason. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Mason. Call me. I stared at the screen, then locked it. No response. No engagement. Nothing. Because this part wasn't about conversation anymore. It was about position. And for the first time since the party, I wasn't reacting to him. He was reacting to me. Across the apartment, everything was quiet. Clean. Still mine. But now it felt different. Not just controlled. Protected. Because the moment I put things in writing, the whole dynamic changed. He wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't even ahead. He was catching up and failing. I turned off the lights one by one, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door. For the first time since everything started, I didn't feel like I was defending something. I felt like I was holding it, firmly, without apology. And somewhere out there, Mason was realizing something too. Whatever he tried next, it wouldn't come from confidence. It would come from desperation. The call came on a quiet afternoon. Not unknown this time. A name. Mrs. Carter. Mason's mother. I stared at it for a second before answering. Hello? Her voice came through soft and careful. The kind of softness that isn't kindness so much as strategy. Natalie, hi. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. You are, but I didn't say that. No, I replied. What do you need? A pause. Just enough to arrange what came next. I wanted to talk about Mason. Of course you did. He's not doing well, she said. This whole situation has been very hard on him. I leaned against the counter and looked out the window. The same street. The same passing cars. Everything ordinary outside. Except this. I'm sure it has, I said. Another pause. He's under a lot of stress. Work, pressure, and now this. Now this. As if it had descended on him from the sky. As if he hadn't built it with both hands. He mentioned there are still some things at your place. There it was. Not direct. Never direct. What things? I asked. A small hesitation. Then, the chair. Of course. Always the chair. $600. An unpaid promise. One object he had somehow turned into a symbol of injury. He needs it for work, she continued. His back has been bothering him, and I paid for it, I said calmly. The sentence cut straight through her explanation. Silence. Then, softer. I understand that, and we can sort that out. But right now, he just needs it back. Needs. Not owes. Not repays. Needs. I closed my eyes for a second. And for the first time in all of this, I felt tired. Not weak. Just finished with the performance. Finished with people speaking around the truth instead of through it. He can have it, I said. Relief rushed into her voice instantly. Oh, that's wonderful. I knew you would. For $600. The relief vanished. Just like that. Replaced with silence. Heavy. Real. That's what I paid, I continued. That's what he said he'd pay me back. That's what he never did. Another pause. Longer this time. He doesn't have that kind of money right now, she said carefully. Of course he didn't. He didn't have it when he got the chair either, I replied. A shift entered her voice. Less soft. More pointed. Natalie, I think we can both agree this has gone far enough. Keeping something he uses for work. I'm not keeping his property, I said. I'm keeping what I bought. That's not how relationships work. I almost smiled. No, I said quietly. That's how accountability works. Silence again. But different now. Less controlled. More strained. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. No, I replied. I'm making it exact. That landed. Because numbers are hard to argue with. $600. One chair. One boundary. Nothing vague about it. If he wants it, I added, he can pay for it. And then I stopped talking. I let the silence stretch. On the other end, I could hear her breathing change. Thinking. Recalculating. Looking for a softer angle and not finding one. Because this wasn't emotional anymore. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a transaction. And transactions don't bend because someone's mother asks nicely. I'll speak to him, she said finally. Do that. Then the call ended. 2 days passed. Quietly. No messages. No missed calls. No complaints. Then my phone lit up with a banking notification. Transfer received. $600. Exact. No note attached. No apology. No explanation. Just the amount. Clean and final. I stared at it for a long moment. Not surprised. Just confirmed. Because in the end, this was the only language Mason had respected from the beginning. Not honesty. Not loyalty. Not even love. Value. And now, for once, the numbers were on my side. I didn't move right away. I made coffee, watered the plant by the window, read the notification again. Then I unplugged the chair, rolled it away from the desk, adjusted the height once without thinking. It looked different now. Not his. Not mine. Just settled. Paid for. Resolved. I opened the apartment door, set the chair outside, and stepped back in. No message. No arrangement. No conversation. If he wanted it, he knew where it was. Then I stood by the window, not waiting. Just there. A few minutes later, I saw him. Mason, walking up alone. No Ava. No friends. No audience. He looked smaller that way, without other people around to reflect him back at himself. He reached the door, saw the chair, stopped. For a second, he didn't touch it. He just stood there looking at it, as if it carried more meaning than it should have, or maybe less. Then he picked it up, carefully this time. No anger. No performance. No muttered speech for the hallway to overhear. He didn't knock. He didn't look at the door. He didn't look up at my window. He just turned and left. And that was it. No last confrontation. No apology. No dramatic closing line. Just an exchange. Completed. I stayed by the window for a long time after he disappeared. Not because I was hoping for anything. Because I was registering the quiet. Something had ended. Not just the relationship. Not just the argument. Something older. The part of me that kept explaining, kept adjusting, kept staying a little longer than I should have. Gone. In its place was something quieter and harder to shake. Not rage, not triumph, clarity. Later that night, I sat alone in the apartment with the lights low and thought about the ring. $100. I never got it back. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want it. Some things aren't worth reclaiming. They're only worth learning from. The truth is, all of it cost me more than the ring and more than the chair. More than $700. More than 4 years. It cost me time. Trust. Versions of myself I don't get back. But it gave me something too. Something I hadn't had before. Boundaries that didn't move. Clarity that didn't shake. And the ability to walk away without asking permission. Outside, the city kept moving. Unaware. Unchanged. But inside, everything was different. Because this time, when something ended, I didn't lose myself in it. I closed it.